분명 그대는 나일세 분명 그대는 나일세 나는 미쳐 못.
Hello and welcome to our program today. I'm Steve Shields, President of the Royal Asiatic Society Korea, and with me is Dr. Kim Yong-Duk, a retired professor of physics from Sogang University, who has spent the last 30 years delving into the secrets of Korean history and discovering the key to those secrets in the usage of Idu. Dr. Kim is also a member of the Royal Asiatic Society Korea and is a past president. Well, thank you for joining me.
I'm very happy that I have this opportunity to introduce the use of Idu in studying Korean history.
Well, Idu is a term that many Koreans would know, at least at the basic level that it was some writing system. But for those who have not had that Korean experience, can you briefly explain a little bit about what do we mean when we say Idu?
Idu is nothing but the way of transcribing Korean words into, with the help of Chinese ideogram, by making use of its sound and also the meaning. But usually what I make use of Idu, only making use of Chinese ideograms sound.
So what I'm understanding then is that Idu was an ancient way of writing Korean words, particularly names and places, when there was no Korean script. This was before Hangul was invented.
That's right.
And so the scholars or the government officials created this system using the sounds of Chinese characters in place of any Korean names or places.
That's right. It just so happened that in the 3rd century, Wei Dynasty have published the State Chronicles, and there's an article on Korea, and naturally you have to use some of the place names or people's names in the writing.
So this is a Chinese chronicle.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, now, I've been in Korea for a number of years, and I'm familiar with the idea that most people's names, if not all, are written in Chinese characters and have the meaning and sound as well. You're saying something a little different.
That's right. In olden days, a place name like Seoul, it's a traditional pure Korean names without any Chinese origins. So naturally, you have to transcribe Seoul into Chinese writings, and you just make use of Chinese ideograms sound only in the beginning. In the 3rd century.
So, in those old days, Korean names were not necessarily Chinese character names?
No.
When did the Koreans start using Chinese characters for their names?
Most likely since about 7th century or so.
The 7th century or so would be like the 600s, 700s, in that era.
Just like my name, Kim, of Kim's clan, has started to have a name only 7th century. Before, we didn't have any Kim, but only the given name.
So that's kind of new information for me.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know that.
All right.
So the names that we know in modern times that Koreans have only date back until about the unified Shilla period.
Not exactly. The Kims from the Shilla dynasty, they came from China.
Oh.
According to their tradition.
Yeah.
It's the Kim of the Shin Kim family clan.
Yeah.
According to their claim, they've derived from Hunno in Korean. It's a day back before centuries,
Okay.
And they moved to Korea in the 1st century, according to their claim.
According to their idea. So with without Hangul, there were still native Korean names and words.
Exactly.
And there was basically no way to write them down.
That's right.
Except for using a known writing system, which in this case would have been the Chinese characters.
That's right.
And using the sound of what those characters
In the beginning.
sounded
Yeah.
like, not necessarily the meaning also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, with that kind of sets a groundwork for us of what Idu was, because we don't use Idu anymore.
No.
In modern writings.
No.
We have Hangul,
Mm-hmm.
and then, of course, other modern languages have come into place here. With the times when there was no other writing system but Chinese characters, what kinds of examples are there where we've seen this writing on records? You mentioned the Chinese chronicles where they talked about Korea. What examples in Korea itself, are there written records or inscriptions somewhere that have used Idu?
No, I mentioned two examples.
Okay.
One example is the Chinese Chronicle of Wei Dynasty.
Wei Dynasty.
3rd century. And according to this Wei Dynasty Chronicle, they mention the chief of the 5 different areas in Mahan or Pyeongan in southern Korea. And they don't have a family name, but except the King Jin, who control the whole Mahan. In this case, this chief's name are written down in Chinese ideograms, borrowing the Chinese ideograms, sound only. And so that's one example. Another example would be the one that I've been extensively used in my paper, published in 2009, with the title Inscription on the Iron Sword of Narayama Tumulus. And that would be a good example of 8 different generation names. See?
So inscribed on this sword, which was uncovered in a tomb in Japan,
that's right,
are 8 names of Korean leaders, officials, kings, however we want to call it, nobility. And this sword we'll talk about in a few more minutes, but that's one of the basis of your studies on Baekje history.
That's exactly
is looking at the inscription, because we have that sword and we can see the inscription.
Right.
You had told me earlier that there were 4 basic ideas about Idu that were very important. And can we review those?
Yes.
What did we say
like
here?
There were about 4 fundamental rules.
Okay.
Very basic.
Okay, basic rules, yes.
The first one would be all the transcription of the Korean word in Chinese ideograms.
Okay.
When we read it in the Chinese writings, then all the Korean reading would end in vowels. That's one rule.
Okay.
And the second rule would be R or L can be interchanged with N. Okay. So that's...
and we're talking the sounds of
R
R or L could interchange with the N sound. Okay.
And thirdly, probably the common sound we encountered in those days would be in a phonetic symbol. It's like a gamma in Greek letters.
Okay.
But it sounds like a KH guttural sound.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be pronounced either H or K in later days. So that's about the 3 rules that can think of.
Yeah. Well, let's understand very quickly, if we can, why is knowing about Edu important in historical research?
Well, it's simple. Simply because you have to find out place names, people's names, and it's all written in ideograms. And by knowing exactly the name and place names, you can trace all the fundamental facts in history.
But when I look at an inscription, how can I know that I shouldn't read it as a Chinese word, but should read it as a Korean word? Is there a way to easily tell?
Well, not exactly. I mean, you have to read the whole sentence, figure it out.
Okay, so in the context,
that's right.
That word, if I read it in Chinese as a Chinese word, it may not, or most likely doesn't fit. Especially when I know the record is basically written by Koreans.
That's right. That's right.
You had introduced me to a couple of books, one
right.
of which is this book published in 1983 by a North Korean scholar,
right.
and it's been republished here in South Korea
right.
about 20 years or so ago. Professor Yu Ryol, North Korean Edu scholar.
Yeah.
And he, in what I consider to be very small print, for several hundred pages,
right.
has explained all of the workings of, the examples of, the ins and outs
exactly.
of Edu in ancient Korean historical records.
Right.
It would seem to me that you probably had to start with a book like this
exactly.
to even begin to get a handle on it. The second book is a Chinese linguist.
This one here.
This one here, we've got two different copies. And this Chinese linguist has taken, he's not dealing with Edu. He's dealing with Chinese characters, Chinese words, and the pronunciations in different time periods.
Exactly.
And we know linguistically, every language goes through development and change.
Right.
And so this professor in mainland China has been able to determine through various historical studies ancient pronunciation, Middle Chinese pronunciation, modern Chinese pronunciation, all of those changes.
Right. And
sometimes the changes are slight.
Right.
Sometimes they're pretty big. But earlier today we were looking at a photograph of the original Hangul text by King Sejong.
Right.
And we were looking at some of the ways that things were being spelled, even in Hangul, just 600 years ago, that have changed dramatically since then. So in English, my granddaughter recently has been studying Beowulf in her high school English literature class. And she said to me, it doesn't even sound like English at all.
That's right.
Well, that Beowulf is only 1,000 years ago. So the Chinese pronunciations over the last several thousand years have probably gone through some major adjustments. And so this book here is kind of the catalog of the pronunciations.
That's right.
And again, this, I know you won't be able to see this well on the camera, but it's almost minuscule in its presentation. And but it's got explanation, and it's got a key to finding. And if you have studied any Chinese characters, we know there are the basic characters, which we call radicals, that show up and then are added to others.
Exactly.
And so so these two books have been really essential tools in your study and understanding of the Inariyama iron sword and what is actually written on that sword.
Okay, this is the title of my book, my paper.
The paper. Yeah, put it closer to the camera,
Okay,
I think.
inscription on the Inariyama tombless sword revisited. And look, This
Put it up.
115 Chinese
You
characters
explain, I'll hold it.
written in iron sword, and lots of names of 8 generations names are written in Chinese ideograms. So we have to figure out which is what. And one best way is, understanding of Ido. Ido is, as I said, is a way of transcribing Korean word with the help of Chinese ideogram through its sound and meaning, but usually in all the text, all the sound.
The sound, yeah.
For example, this character for
This character.
that's the
Okay.
character,
I'm going to put it closer here.
and this is the title or picture word for Lord in the inscription. There are about 4 different lords, and with province they ruled. Huh?
Okay, so in the inscription on the sword,
That's right.
there's the names of 4 lords
Yeah,
and the areas that they ruled. Okay,
That's
so
right.
and this is what does this Chinese character mean
This-
though in itself?
so that's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
This Chinese character in present day in Korea, it's pronounced like a hue, but in Japanese it's pronounced like a hua, kaku. And we're trying to trace back the 3rd century, or 5th century rather, when this iron sword was made. And the way we figured out the exact sound of this period, 471, 5th century, is by help of this book here. And what you do is, look this Chinese character, and there's radicals,
Okay,
and you look up the list of
so you start with the radicals.
radicals.
Okay,
Then from the radicals, you count the strokes of the rest of the Chinese characters.
right. And
This
so,
one here.
so which one is the radical?
This was the
This one
radical.
here is the radical.
Yeah, common to the many characters.
Okay.
The same.
And then we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
That's right.
like that,
And
to then
then
track down.
you
the,
look up this list of for this word with the radicals and that page. Then go back to the page.
Okay, so we first go to the radical index, and then we find the radical, then we find where to get the rest of the character,
It's all listed in the pages.
and
huh?
we can go back.
Right.
Okay.
So, for example, this character has a sound, and modern days, in present day Korean, it's become like oh.
Oh,
Oh. So the 2 words together would be 고가. 고가. 고가 is a very common word in Korean, even today,
yeah.
meaning the best.
Oh,
고가 옷,
like the top
top,
quality, top
best dress.
Okay.
고가
Oh,
옷.
okay.
But it's a common word.
Okay.
We didn't know that its character shows up in
Yeah.
the Iron Sword inscription.
Yeah.
Also, 3rd century Chinese chronicles, same word.
The same word.
With different Chinese character, with almost similar sound of it.
Okay.
So that's how we figured out
Okay.
meaning.
And so, how was it pronounced in the 5th century?
With most like a quack.
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 And this one is ka.
Ka.
So quack ka.
Ka. Quack ka.
That's the original sound, I guess.
Oh, okay, that's the best guess we can
Yeah, best
come with
guess we
the
can,
information,
uh-huh.
sure.
And,
And it meant Lord.
no,
No?
it meant the supreme.
Supreme.
Life.
Oh, supreme.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Huak was the supreme.
And in the Iron Sword,
Yeah.
look here, this name comes in right here. Oh.
Where is it?
Oh, yeah. this character.
Oh, there it is right there,
Yeah.
yes.
So this is a Kiru,
Kiru.
like a Keru.
Okay.
It becomes a Kiru
Kiru.
in those days. So this refers to the supreme, great Kero, King the Great. So that's
King
what.
Kero the Great
Yeah.
would be how we might say that in
Yeah,
modern English.
exactly.
And,
That's how I interpret it.
And in modern Korean, we would say Kero Taelong,
That's right.
like that.
That's right.
Okay.
So that's how I figured out
Okay.
this must be referring to this great king,
Yeah.
Kero.
Yeah, because the name Kiro in the Idu
That's right.
is not. There's no other possibility for somebody else
You know,
because of the time period.
very interestingly,
You know.
in Japanese interpretation, they read it as Wakata Keru, Kero.
Wakata.
But there's no Ru.
Oh,
But still, identify this as one of the king called Wakatake, which is, I think, is a wrong guess. But what I insist is this refers to picture King Kero.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And not only that, the rest of the name refers either a place name in Japan or in Korea.
So this sword that was uncovered in a tomb in Japan has people's names and place names also in what is now Korea,
Right,
which in those days would have been a Baekje
right,
area.
right.
Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right.
Well, when that sword was first discovered, what was the translation done by Japanese scholars
You say this,
indicative of that? Or?
this sword was found in the old tomb in Kyoto City, about 56 kilometers north of Tokyo. And according to the inscription, the sword was made in 471. So what I insist is, this is transcription must have been based on the sound of that period.
Okay.
So that's why I look up this dictionary and look up the sound of original
time
Chinese
period. Okay.
sound,
Mm.
and that's the best guess.
Okay.
Perhaps this is a transcription of this original name.
But your guess isn't just guesswork.
Uh-huh.
You also have other names on
That's
this
right.
inscription that
That's
help
right.
you frame the context
Exactly.
to make a very educated guess, it
Exactly.
would seem to me. And but the date is important
Right.
because that gives us when,
Exactly.
and when is always an important part of where and what.
I think you have pointed out a very important point. And according to what I interpret, this first one is agreed with everybody. Thinks this is a 471.
Okay.
Okay.
So all the scholars around the
Yeah,
table agree with the date.
more or less.
More, yeah.
And then all we have to do is to decipher the name or titles of these people written in this record.
Yeah.
And it turned out, for an example, this Tasagi refers to one of the ports in the southern part of peninsula.
Of the Korean peninsula.
Korean peninsula, Tasagi is the present-day Hadong. And that's called Tasagi at the time.
Okay.
And there's a title is following that name. The title is Baekje. Baekje in present Japanese chronicle is referred as Wake.
Okay.
And
Wake, that's
well,
an easy shift.
Waka is the supreme.
Yeah.
Wake means Lord. And it turns out Tasagi Wake, that means the Lord that ruled the province Tasagi in southern part. It turns out, if your dates, roughly, it's around 396 or so that they left this part of peninsula, then goes over to Tokyo Bay Area. How do we know? Its name. The next name is Hara Kohi. And I found Japanese made one mistake in that reading Chinese characters, and it turns out in my reading it would be Hara Kohi. Kohi stands for river.
Okay.
Hara means field, and field. I mean, it turns out they landed on the riverside of this river. Present-day name is Arakawa. H is dropped, you see, from Arakawa. So I just find this, they've reached this riverside of Tokyo Bay Area. In probably same year, 1996 or so.
Yeah.
They moved on to Kyoto area, which was called Ku in 471. So that's the name given to this original fabricator of this sort.
So these are people who would have been Baekje people who traveled to what is now modern-day Japan, Tokyo area, and moved somewhat north.
Right.
So they're the ones who made this sword?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Probably it's made in Korea, Baekje, and sent over to
The sword itself
with
could have
inscription.
been made in
Korea.
Baekje,
In
in modern-day Korean
Yeah.
peninsula, and then sent over to Japan.
That's my conjecture.
Now the sword is an unusually shaped sword. It has branches on it.
No, not that one.
That one, oh, this is a different sword.
This
Is this just a straight sword?
This straight sword,
Okay.
75 centimeters in length.
Oh, 75 centimeters in length,
Right.
so not quite a meter.
No.
Okay, so this is just a straight sword. There's another sword that I was confusing.
Oh,
that
seven
has
branches.
the seven branches,
No,
and that's
another one.
It's another
That's
story.
another more famous one.
So this sword is a sword, but it clearly would not be used for battle because of all the inscriptions.
That's what I think.
So it was a gift of a ceremonial gift of some kind, possibly.
What I get,
or- yeah.
what I conjecture is this family is so proud of the tradition that they had their family history inscribed
Oh.
on the sword and buried it with the owner. That's what I guess.
So the deceased, it was part of the grave goods
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
burial,
Yeah.
in this tomb.
Discovered in 1968,
68.
become a Japanese treasure.
Okay. Do we know who's buried in the tomb?
Oh, obviously this Lord Ku, who the one that who fabricated this.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
It's obvious.
But those other names on the sword are older generations
That's
of
right.
his family,
That's what I think.
who are clearly Baekje
Origin.
personalities and
They
figures
moved
who moved to.
during the invasion of Kogyo in 396.
In 396, there was an invasion from Koguryo in the north into Baekje,
Right?
and many refugees went to the Japanese archipelago.
No, two only family.
Two families.
Two famous families.
Famous families, okay.
One is Ojin. It's called Homuda Baekje. And Homuda again, it refers to the old name of Gongju. He was the Lord.
Oh, yes.
And that's my guess.
Oh,
The two families fled together
okay.
to Japan.
Okay.
One settled down in Nara area. One moved all the way back to Tokyo.
To the Tokyo area, which is further north
Further
along
north,
the
yeah.
eastern side of the archipelago.
Anyway, this is a good example
Yeah.
how deciphering all these names or titles through Ido or through transcription of Korean word with help of meaning, the sound of Chinese characters, then you can figure out the original name and trace the history and also all the historical events involved.
Mm. And just to recap, what we have Korean historical records, but many Chinese historical records, some Japanese historical records that all refer to this system of writing, and in many cases recorded, like in the Chinese Chronicle, about Baekje,
Right.
using Idu in their own writings.
Right.
So this is not just some unique specialty of only known by Koreans. It was a rather widespread understanding amongst the
But
scholars.
they have
and-
no other choice. I mean, there's
Yeah, yeah.
only way to
Right.
write it down.
Right, right. And that it's difficult for us modern folks to imagine that we would have no way of writing down our name or history, but
That's right.
when we have to go back in time, pen and paper was not readily available to everybody. And the writing system in Eastern Asia, there was one kind.
That's right.
And we know that as Chinese characters in a general terminology. And so everybody and probably not just Korea, but in other areas of Asia, adapted the Chinese writing somehow or another.
Yes,
to fit.
most like Japan and
Korea were
made
the
good use of it.
primary ones that,
Primary.
yeah.
Oh, Vietnam maybe, I don't know.
may have, yeah, I don't know.
But,
Yeah, so so Chinese characters were the only writing system available in
That's
those
right.
ancient times.
That's right.
B, and we're just talking about what's now Korea, Baekje and the other parts that were on the Korean peninsula adapted writing system
Right.
in whatever way they could to keep their own written records,
Right.
and using the sounds
Right.
primarily of Chinese characters, even not always the meaning.
That's right.
Okay. So it's the context that's so critical, because if you read it all, for example, with these and try to use the meanings, then you
Right.
have some nonsensical
Exactly.
terms
Exactly.
that come up.
Exactly.
And some scholars have tried to make sense of that in a different
Exactly.
way.
That's it.
But when we use Idu,
Yeah.
we're able to unlock the secret
Exactly.
of what this writing system is.
Exactly. That's what I tried to
Very
say.
good. Yeah.
I mean, it's so easy. But
Well,
then,
it seems easy, Dr. Kim, but some of us, it's difficult.
But
because I don't have a background in Chinese characters, and I'm finding your scholarship on this to be just mind-opening for me. And I can read a little, but
with the help of this
with the help of the book,
dictionary,
we can figure that out.
Chinese ideograms sound, then that's a key.
So, if you have unlocked some of this secret, it also suggests that the history that we've grown up with about Korea probably has got some different interpretations that we need to look at. And that'll be a good topic for a future discussion
Exactly.
about some of those. I might add, before we quit, that Dr. Kim has been giving monthly lectures for many years and has a YouTube channel, 70 or more videos of lectures about early Korean history, focusing primarily on the Baekje region, what we would know as the geography. And he's also published several books on the topic. There's one in Japanese language, the others are in Korean language. Your YouTube channel is primarily Korean language. And so today, this marks kind of our first venture into an English language lecture on the topic. And we're very happy to have you join us. We thank you for your attention. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for all of your work.
I appreciate this opportunity to introduce this usefulness of instead of use of Idu in deciphering some of the hidden history, not only in Korea, but also in Japan.
In Japan, too, yep.
Oh, I think it's a fascinating topic. And Idu is, as I use it, very simple, as I explained it. Anybody can learn it within a few minutes and how to use it.
Yep.
And there's no reason why you stay away. Okay. And I'm so happy you're interested in it.
Well, thank you very much. I am a novice at this, but I've known Dr. Kim for going on 30 years, I suppose. We met through the Royal Asiatic Society of Korea, and we've been fortunate to live not too far away from each other for the past several years, and so we can get together and chat, and I can learn a little more about Korea's early history from Dr. Kim. Thanks for all of your work on this, and we look forward to doing another lecture together in the near future.
Oh, sounds good.
Thanks for joining us. Good evening.
누가 알까 나는 미처 몰랐네